Hi, everybody, and welcome to this Bridging the Gap project webinar on op-ed writing. I'm Jordan Tama. I'm a co-director. I'm also an assistant professor at American University's School of International Service. And this webinar is part of a series that to these outside of academia, the policy community or communities, as well as the public. And op-ed writing is one important way in which people can communicate with people outside of academia, communicate about their research. And we're really fortunate today to be joined by Anya Schmemann, who is Director of Global Communications and Media Relations at the Council on Foreign Relations. And she has a lot of experience in the area of communications, both at the Council on Foreign Relations and at other institutions. She's been an assistant dean of communication and outreach at American University's School of International Service, and she's also held other positions at the Council on Foreign Relations, including director of the task force program there, director of editorial strategy, and director of communications and marketing. And she's also written for a variety of publications, Congressional Interest, The Atlantic, U.S. News and World Report, on various international topics, and she's worked with a lot of scholars to place their own writing, including op-ed writing. So she has the experience both of doing this kind of writing herself and of working with a lot of other people to help them get op-eds and other kinds of writing placed in major newspapers and other publications. So to get this started, and this will be interactive, we're going to have a lot of time for your own questions. But first, I'm going to kick things off with Anya by asking her some questions, and then if you have questions as we move forward, you can ask questions either by raising your hand on your screen or using the
Hi everyone, Anya here. Jordan, we seem to have lost you for a second. You seem to be frozen. But I'll assume that you have finished your introduction. And so thank you, everyone. We're just going to check on your screen, Jordan. I will just continue then. So welcome to this webinar on op-ed writing and opinion writing. Many of you know what an op-ed is, but just to be clear, an op-ed is a short opinion piece which serves to share a viewpoint. It's usually an outside contributor who is contributing an opinion. Traditionally, in print, these pieces appear opposite the editorial page, op-ed. So that's a little bit of cocktail party trivia for you. Op-ed does not stand for opinion editorial. It is opposite the editorial page. And back in the old days, it actually was meant to provide a contrast to the editorial page. That has disappeared a little now, but in print they still appear opposite the editorial. Online, of course, op-eds appear everywhere and anywhere.
Anya, could you talk a bit about why writing an op-ed is something that scholars should consider doing, either faculty members or PhD students working in international affairs? They have a lot of other things to be thinking about and worrying about. Why should they spend any time thinking about writing an op-ed article?
Yeah, so students and faculty members have a lot on their agendas, but they also have a lot of options to share their opinions. That's been a big change over the past decade. You can share your opinions via blogs, via tweets, on Facebook, in interviews, in podcasts, or in sessions like this in a webinar. So why an op-ed? An op-ed may seem a bit old-fashioned, but it still is in policy circles and among opinion shapers and influencers, still a very prestigious forum, especially in the top papers. People still do look at the op-eds, and particularly when there are issues that the government is wrestling with, it can be very valuable to share a variety of opinions on the op-ed pages. So if you are looking to shape the policy discussion, contribute to the policy discussion, get involved in those policy debates, An op-ed really should be in your toolkit of things to consider to get your own research and your opinions out there. So now that we've established what an op-ed is and why it's a useful format, how do you actually go about writing one? So the good news is that an op-ed is a pretty generic format. There is a formula for it. Op-eds I mentioned are short. They're usually between 500 and 800 words. Most papers prefer in the 700-word range. And they follow a pretty similar structure. In an op-ed, you'll always have your central argument up at the top. This is a little different from most academic writing where you build your argument to a grand conclusion. In an op-ed, you put your argument first. When I receive draft op-eds from scholars, I very often take the end and just flip it up to the beginning, because usually your sharp point can go right at the outset. You want to set the stage, give a little bit of information and context about what you're arguing, share some information, and then get right to your sharp point. Always have 3 supporting arguments, at least. You can number them, first, second, third. Then you're going to want to share a contrasting or alternate point of view. That's an important part of an op-ed. That's the part where you acknowledge that there are different points of view out there. And you take note of the conventional wisdom, the reigning view, if you will, and you share your own contrasting view. And then you're going to want to conclude in a snappy way. A good conclusion will usually refer to the outset. So that's it in a nutshell. It's 6 or 7 paragraphs, short, tight, to the point. It sounds easy,
Hi, Anya,
a short, tight piece, but it can be surprisingly difficult to write short and to write with very short paragraphs, short sentences, and get right to your point. Hi, Jordan. So I was just giving the basic structure of op-ed.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can.
Anya, can you hear me? You can, okay. Sorry about that, everybody. The signal in my office seemed to be poor, so we've moved to a different place. So you've probably already covered a lot, and tell me if you've already talked about this, but what about the structure of an op-ed? Can you talk a bit about how op-eds are structured? Is there kind of a formula to follow, or any tips that you could give for how to think about that?
I did just cover the basic structure and formula, but I'm happy to discuss some tips. So one thing that trips up academics often is that you all are experts in your topic, deep experts. And you may write with some jargon or acronyms that are known to you and your colleagues, but may not be known to a wider audience. So it's very important to keep a broader audience in view. If you're writing for publications like the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Financial Times, you can assume a high level of knowledge in foreign policy and in politics. But you shouldn't ever assume a deep understanding of your own particular area. I recommend that people consider, a sort of fake audience, if you will. Imagine that you're writing for your college roommate, or your next door neighbor, or your mother. What kind of questions would those people have? These are well-informed people who presumably are following the news, but they might have some specific questions. So avoid jargon, avoid acronyms, avoid insider speak, avoid a lot of speculation. If you have research to share, make it digestible. There are no footnotes in an op-ed. If you're online, you can add a lot of links, but if you're in print, what you write is what you get. So you can't do a lot of citations. And research should be there to support your central argument. So those are some basic tips for writing a clear and persuasive piece.
Great. And is there a right moment to try to write an op-ed? So a lot of us are doing research which may not be always directly tied to something happening in the news or at the top of the headlines right this moment, but sometimes might come into the news? Should we wait until our issues in the news, or can we pitch op-eds even when the topic that we're doing research on isn't at the top of the news? How should we think about that?
Yeah, this is one of the most difficult questions, is always this timing question. And there's no, silver bullet, as they say here. But it does help to have a news peg. So most of the major opinion outlets receive hundreds of submissions a week and sometimes a day. They are also short-staffed. So you have a small editorial team sifting through hundreds of submissions. So you just have to understand that the competition is tough. So having a piece that's pegged to news definitely is stronger. Now, the question of timing is always important. Most newspapers will ask for a week to 10 days to consider a piece. That can be hard when news is hot and things are changing quickly. So you want a piece that's pegged to the news, but also has a bit of a shelf life. Now, there are periods during the year when editors will consider the so-called evergreen pieces, pieces that are not hinged to the front pages of the papers. Holidays are a great time to pitch, a less hot piece, summers, vacation times, sometimes weekends. And editors often appreciate having some of those kinds of pieces in their pockets to fill the pages when the news is slow. But your best bet is to hinge the news and make that clear in your pitch. And I know we'll talk a little bit more about pitches in a bit.
Yeah, well, that's a good segue to talking about them more. So how should someone pitch an op-ed? Does someone need to know somebody at a newspaper? If you don't know anyone, how would you go about this? Can you give some guidance on that? Yeah.
Yeah, so say that you have written a nice clean piece. It's 800 words, it's sharp, it has a persuasive opinion, it has your 3 supporting arguments, it has a zippy ending. You have shared your piece with some colleagues who have given you their input. I always recommend getting a number of people to read your draft, proof it, make sure it's clean and ready to go. As I just said, the editors don't have a lot of time, so they will reject something that doesn't look ready for the pages. Your piece should be polished and ready to go. So you have that strong piece, now you're ready to pitch it. I do recommend working with your university communications office if you have an office and if you have people who are familiar with the process. Oftentimes communications professionals have contacts, they know the process, they can help guide you through the system. They can also provide recommendations to you of where your piece could go. If it's an online venue or a local place or a big league newspaper. So work with your communications professionals. Every outlet has their own process. So do a little research. Go online and check. First of all, have they been publishing on your topic? Is this an area that interests them? Would this be of interest to their readers? Have they published something very recently? And if so, that's probably a sign that your piece won't get in. And what is their process? Most outlets have a generic email that they want you to use, and that goes into a tracking system. So even if you have a friend, at, say, the Wall Street Journal, that friend can be helpful, but at the end of the day, you do still need to submit your piece to the generic email and get it into the tracking system. That'll make sure that someone looks at it and it's properly considered and goes through the process. You will likely get a automatic response saying, thank you, we've received your email, and we need about 10 days to take a look at it. That doesn't mean you have to sit and wait for 10 days. After a couple days, you can ping your friend if you have one there, or ping the editor and ask how it's doing. But that's the general process. Along with your op-ed, you should share a short pitch, really short, a couple sentences. Dear editor, attached, please find an op-ed which argues X, whatever your argument is. A little bit of information about yourself so that you can provide some of some reason for them to look at it, and then thank them for their consideration. So the whole thing is maybe 4 or 5 sentences long, and that's your basic pitch.
And do you need to have the op-ed written? You're suggesting that the op-ed should be written. Is there any chance that someone might pick up something just based on a pitch, or is that really a extreme long shot? And if you really want to have a chance, you should actually send a draft of a full op-ed rather than just sending a pitch.
Yeah, I'm using pitch in a sort of communications jargony way, which is the note that accompanies the piece. The real pitching, advanced pitching, is rare on the op-ed pages. Unless you are a known quantity to the paper or someone quite famous, it's pretty rare that an editor will just consider an idea. They are most often going to want to see the actual thing. Now, having said that, you can try, and it sometimes works. If you are an expert on, say, an environmental issue, and you know that there is a big conference coming up that is going to be dealing with this issue, and you have a particular perspective, you can be in touch with the op-ed editor and say, I have this particular expertise, or I'm going to be a member of this delegation, or I helped negotiate this accord, and I have something to say about this upcoming event in a month. Would you be interested in a piece? An editor will likely respond in saying, yes, wow, that sounds great, but no promises until I actually see the draft. But it can be helpful to at least get in the queue that way. That is most useful for major international events, anniversaries, things that you can schedule and are coming down the pike.
Okay, great. Well, I can ask a lot more questions, but I want to see if any of the participants have any questions. So if you have a question, you can either write it in the chat box or press the button on your screen that raises your hand. Any questions? Okay, I see someone typing. While people type, which might take a minute, I'll ask one more question. So does someone need to establish their credibility in writing for a newspaper? So most of us are not going to be people who are known to a newspaper editor. So do we need to kind of show them that we're someone important, or do something in the op-ed to establish that we're a credible person that people should listen to?
Yes, it is important to explain to the editor why they should listen to you. It's also important to explain that to your reader. So you are going to want to include, in your one-line bio, what your expertise is and why you are an authority on this topic. That also should be included in your email pitch to the editor. And again, the more specific you can be, the better. If you're writing an op-ed about troop withdrawals or drawdown in Afghanistan, for example, if you can say, I served in the armed forces in Afghanistan, or I did research on the ground there, or I conducted a research project, looking at, the importance of civil society in Afghanistan. Anything you can do to explain why we should be listening to you is indeed helpful. I also recommend not to shy away from the first person, and that's a little unusual. And not all op-eds do that. But if you have directly relevant experience, if you saw something, experienced something, if your research shows something new and unusual, then put yourself in the op-ed. Say, my research shows, or I saw this when I was on the ground doing research. Put yourself in, again, not trumpeting yourself, but to show your own expertise. Now, do you need to be a world-famous professor to get published? Yes, it helps. And I do recommend to young scholars and students to co-author with a colleague when possible. Co-author with a senior professor or a senior policymaker. Oftentimes they'll be delighted to co-author with you, especially if you're offering to do most of the work. And that can help also get your name in the door. Op-ed editors are on the lookout for fresh voices. They want some fresh perspectives on their pages. They're particularly interested in hearing from women, from minorities, from underrepresented voices. So there is a window for it, but you do have to capture that attention at the outset.
Okay, so we do have a number of questions now that people have typed. So we have one from Sally Nwama. Are there particular outlets that are good starting points?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the good news is that there are lots of opportunities now. It used to be that there were a small handful of papers which really dominated the op-ed scene, and now that things have expanded online, there are lots and lots of opportunities. So I recommend looking at hometown papers. Hometown papers usually love to hear from their local stars who have gone on to do great things. I think some university papers are actually quite good. There's also a number of international outlets that are very interesting. You can find English language papers in India, in Israel, in Australia, in a number of places. And oftentimes those will have huge readerships. So foreign publications. Also today with Google and everything else, almost anything you post online is likely to get picked up if you promote it properly. So if you are in a niche outlet, say you are a sociologist and you publish in a sociologist journal online, and that may not have a huge audience, but if you then share it on a blog or share it with colleagues or tweet about it, it can get picked up. So I tell people there's really no bad place to be. The important thing is to get out there, establish yourself as a writer, get comfortable with the format, and publish away.
Okay, great. And one more question from Felicity Vabulous. Would your advice be any different as we try to coach grad students and advanced undergrads to also write op-eds? And any good resources to stimulate the process for students in particular?
Yeah, there are a number of great online resources. I do recommend the opedproject.org. This is a project set up to encourage more female voices on the op-ed pages and also as pundits on radio and TV. But the op-ed project has great resources for everyone. They have a number of, they offer contacts, so there's editors, emails there. And they have examples of good op-eds, examples of bad op-eds, and they have this sort of structure that I talked about earlier. So that's a great resource. Students are tough, actually. Op-ed page editors will prefer to publish from someone with authority and someone with a trusted voice. They are wary of taking chances on people who are still working on their studies. Having said that, if a piece is really fresh and really interesting and shows a youthful perspective, then op-ed page editors will be interested. But the advice is basically the same for anyone across the board. Write well, have an opinion, and write short, and try to move the needle with your piece so that you're not just repeating the arguments that are out there, but you're sharing a new and different perspective.
And can you give an example of an op-ed that you think has done this particularly well from a scholar in particular, or a scholar who's good at really bringing their scholarship to a broader audience through an op-ed?
Yeah, I'm not going to name any particular names, but the most competitive places to publish are great places to look at successful op-eds. So the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, the Washington Post as well. These papers, because it's so competitive and so selective, the op-eds tend to be good quality. That's not always true, but it's mostly true. And if you read a number of them, you will start seeing that formula that I discussed earlier appearing over and over again with some slight changes. We all know that there are some academics who are very prolific and very visible on the op-ed pages. Not all of them, I would say, are entirely successful. Some of them are writing about things that they are not expert in, and I find that sometimes is apparent. It is best to write your beat. share what you know. If you are not an expert on China, don't write about China. If you are an expert on the EU, then write about the EU. Share your own expertise, and your deep knowledge will come through.
Okay, we have another question from a participant, Catriona Stanfield. How important is it to find a voice as an op-ed writer, especially for junior scholars?
Yeah, it's surprisingly unimportant. So there isn't really a distinctive voice in op-ed writing. Again, you're working with 700 words. You don't have a lot of space here. The idea here is to be clear, concise, direct, and to the point. This is a different format than a blog. In a blog, you are sharing your individual voice. You are trying to cultivate a following, and your following will appreciate your particular voice. An op-ed is a little different. Think of it more as a policy memo. It's not a work of fiction. It's not very descriptive. You're sharing anecdotes when they're useful and only when they support your main argument. But you're not really telling the world a lot about yourself. What you want to do with this piece is share your opinions and your perspectives and your research. So in that sense, you will find when you read op-eds, there's quite a lot of uniformity in voice. Again, this is also not a column. A column is something quite different. A column is a place in the paper where an individual has a place to share on a weekly or twice weekly or bi-weekly basis. So Washington Post, for example, has a number of columnists, and they have very distinctive voices. The op-eds by outside contributors are meant to contrast with that a little bit.
Okay, and we have a couple other questions coming in, it looks like, but Anya, I wonder if you could just talk a bit more about op-eds as compared to blog posts. You just spoke a bit about one aspect of that, but blog posts may be the kind of most natural competitor to op-eds in terms of folks who might be thinking about doing this kind of shorter writing for a broad audience. What are the trade-offs there or distinctions that you see that are important, and when might one be more benefit more from doing an op-ed versus a blog post or vice versa? What are the distinctions there?
Yeah, there are a lot of similarities, and if you are trying to promote a report or a book, I recommend that you do both, and it shouldn't be an either or choice. A blog is less formal. You have a bit more space. You have, as I just mentioned, you have an opportunity to kind of explore your own voice. You can use the first person, a bit more generously. An op-ed, though, will reach a broader audience in almost any outlet. A blog, people need to come to it. So an op-ed, you're delivering into people's inboxes or their mailboxes. So an op-ed really should be your first and top choice for reaching a broad audience, but it's best supported by a blog. So when I work with scholars on their communication strategies, I do recommend a very broad approach. So again, if you are promoting a report or a book or a film, a documentary, or anything scholarly product that you have worked on, try to think of everything you do as promotional opportunities. So start with the big. Write a journal article, and place it. And then cut that down to an 800-word op-ed. Cut that down to a 500-word blog. Post something on Facebook, and then bring it down to a tweet, a series of tweets, so that everything you do can be chunked, and you're taking a lot of bites at the apple, so to speak. So these things are not independent. They should all be complementary and interactive with each other.
Okay, we have another question from Sally Nwama. Is it okay to submit your op-ed to multiple places at once, or should you write it just for a particular outlet, or submit it just for a particular outlet?
Yeah, good question, and I should have been clear about that. The papers prefer strongly that you submit to one place at a time and that you are exclusive to them. Now, given that they are spending 7 to 10 days considering your piece, that can be a real pain. But it is the preference, and at the Council on Foreign Relations, that is our policy, that we submit to one place at a time, we wait to get rejected, and then we move on to the next place. Now, in practice, a lot of people don't follow that. A lot of people do send to multiple places at once. What you don't want to happen is for two editors to take it and for it to appear in two places at once. Editors really dislike that. And if that happens, you will be put on a blacklist. And there are blacklists. I have seen them. And not being transparent with an editor is one way to get on that list. So if you do submit to more than one place, just be ready to yank it from the others if one person takes it. And be transparent. If you are sending something to The Atlantic, for example, then let them know. I've also sent this to Politico for their consideration. Editors prefer that you share information and are transparent. I should note, while we're on the topic of transparency, most editors will also ask you to reveal any conflicts of interest. This is important.
Okay. Anya, so for folks who are doing research in international affairs, some of the potential outlets might be overseas. If you're doing work on another country or region or an issue that would be relevant to another country or region, any tips for trying to place an op-ed with an international newspaper, either an English language international newspaper or even a newspaper in another country? If you speak another language, do you have experience doing that? Any advice on that?
Yeah, so the same rules apply. Know your outlet, know what they're interested in, know what their readers are interested in, and learn about their process for submission. So most places will have it clearly listed online. It's either under submissions or sometimes in their facts or sometimes in their how to contact, but they will be clear about their preference. I do recommend international outlets, and many international outlets also have partnerships with United States organizations. So if something appears in, say, a newspaper in New Zealand, sometimes those pieces will be picked up by various syndicates in the United States. Jordan, I was in the middle of talking about conflict of interest when you lost me, but let me just say that because I think it's important as we head into a political season right now. Just to be transparent and open when you submit a piece. When an editor expresses interest in a piece, they will often ask you, do you have any conflicts of interest? And that's your opportunity to really share everything and anything. Are you consulting with the company or with an individual? Are you advising someone politically? Are you, going to be testifying in front of Congress? Are you receiving money from any particular foundation or corporation? That's the things that a paper will want to know, and it just helps you also just cover, yourself in case there isn't any controversy going down the road.
Okay, great. We have plenty of time for more questions if anyone does have more questions. Could you maybe speak a bit more about the amount of time that can be required to pitch an op-ed and whether that's a worthwhile investment given the other goals that folks have as professors or as PhD students? It seems that some might worry that if they start down this road, they might spend many days, weeks drafting op-eds, pitching op-eds to different places, never hear anything back, and could be very discouraging. Any thoughts about that very common worry that people would tend to have, that you could spend an enormous amount of time on this and potentially not end up getting an op-ed published? How should we think about that?
It can be discouraging. So I don't want to give any false hope here. I work with senior fellows at the Council on Foreign Relations who do this for a living, and they get rejected all the time. So there's no shame in writing a piece and getting rejected. And it'll often take a lot of tries to find the sweet spot of, a place that's interested in it and, a strong piece. Um, so I'm married to a professor, and I've worked at several universities, and so I get the pressures on academics. And I will often tell, students and professors starting out with their careers that it's important and I think helpful to the national debate for professors to be weighing in on public debates. You all bring a lot to the table. You have deep expertise, deep research. I think the country as a whole, our American public, the international public, can really benefit from your contributions to the important debates of our day. Having said that, being a public intellectual does take time and it does take effort. And so there are real trade-offs. And if you are marching toward tenure, if your book is due, my advice would be to focus on those things first. There will always be time to write op-eds. It also helps to write op-eds or do media interviews or tweet or blog once you have something to hinge it on, if you have a product. So focus on your book, get your books out, and then, market the heck out of your books by doing the whole spectrum of things that I've discussed. And it does get easier.
Okay.
Once you have practice, these things become faster and easier.
Another question from Sally. What is the most common mistake people make in writing op-eds?
So the most common mistake is not having an opinion. Now that may sound obvious that an op-ed should have an opinion, but it's actually one of the hardest things to do, and particularly for academics who are used to being analytical and who are used to seeing multiple sides of an argument, and who, in fact, many of you foster that in your classrooms to, that there is no one right answer, that there are multiple approaches to an issue. An op-ed takes a slightly different perspective. An op-ed stakes out a strong position on one side of an issue. That can be very uncomfortable for people. I counsel a lot of people with op-eds, and I've also written a number myself. And I know how hard it is. It's surprisingly hard. It's hard to write short, and it's hard to be opinionated. A lot of us sort of feel uncomfortable when we see pundits on TV sharing really strong opinions. And it is a little uncomfortable. We are mostly trained to see things in shades of gray, to, again, to see multiple perspectives, to understand all sides of an issue. An op-ed, though, it really is best, and it makes your piece the strongest and most likely to be published if you can identify a sharp point of view and defend it. That's the hardest thing, is not just being analytical and descriptive, but actually being opinionated.
Great. Any other questions? Okay, I see we have another one, I think, coming in. So what about some other forms of public communication that may overlap here a bit? You mentioned tweeting, for instance. So we talked a bit about blog posts. What about engaging in social media, tweeting? Do you see those differently than op-ed writing, or just complementary? How would you think about that sort of totality of different forms of communicating to broader audiences? Tweeting particularly as one other kind.
Twitter is actually a pretty important tool. Increasingly, reporters are on Twitter, and policymakers and opinion shapers. It's really a place for news more and more. And public intellectuals do have a place on Twitter. An ideal tweet is like a mini op-ed. And in fact, Twitter can be a good place for experimenting with ideas and opinions. Sometimes I've worked with scholars who have tweeted various opinions about breaking news, and they'll find that an individual tweet will get a lot of attention, a lot of comments or a lot of shares, and they realize they're kind of onto something there. I've also worked with scholars and fellows who have had pieces picked up by the media via Twitter. So if they share an opinion, sometimes an op-ed editor will actually reach out to them and say, that was a kind of interesting opinion. Would you be interested in writing a longer piece on that? Or I'm a producer for a TV show and I'd be interested in hearing your perspective. So tweets can really get a lot of attention from editors, producers, and bookers. So there's a place for tweets before you write a piece, just to try out ideas, see what sticks, see what people are interested in. And then once you've written your piece, you're definitely going to want to tweet about it. You're going to want to tweet multiple times about it. You're going to want to tweet to individuals. You're going to want to identify people in your field who will be interested and who will share. So I think there's real value in Twitter. Facebook, a little less so. Facebook has evolved as more of a friends and family forum. So it's a nice place to, share your latest research, with your cousins and your college friends. And then that does have value, but you can't, it's not the best place for self-promotion. On Twitter, there's a lot of openness to self-promotion because that's what everybody's doing.
Right. Okay, well, I think we'll leave it there, but I want to also mention that there's a document that you all should be able to download, which Anya has shared, of tips for writing op-eds. So you should see that on your screen and be able to access that. And we will also email that to all of you after the session. So you'll have that. There's some great tips which kind of summarize a lot of the advice that Anya gave today. So first, in closing, Anya, thanks so much for joining us today. This was really, really helpful. You gave a lot of wonderful and very useful advice, so we're really appreciative of you taking the time to do this. And to all the participants, thank you for joining. And we look forward to having you participate in future Bridging the Gap project programming as well.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry we had a few technical difficulties, but I'm also happy to answer any questions offline. The Bridging the Gap folks know how to get in touch with me, and I really appreciate that you've participated in this because, as I said, I do think you all, I'm sure, have a lot to contribute to the debate, so I'm hoping to read you all in the papers or online soon.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Anya. Thank you, everybody.
Take care.
Bye.